What's good, YouTube? It's your boy JusticeXFalls. We back at it again with another video, and today we're looking at Hyper Light Breaker. Now, I saw this game on Facebook on a Facebook ad, and only other information I was able to find on it was the Steam landing page. And I looked on the internet, I couldn't really find any videos, and so I was like, you know what? I'll wait till more videos and stuff come out for it. And now I'm starting to see more videos of this game, so I decided to check this one out. This one popped up in my sub box from you know who, from IGN, and I decided to check it out. So they got a gameplay preview, and we're gonna look at it. So without further ado, let's get to the video.
Watching developer Alex Preston walk me through some early Hyper Light Breaker gameplay at this year's Game Developers Conference makes the already inscrutable world of Hyper Light feel even more esoteric. Hyper Light Drifter was already a game told
Ooh, okay. I remember that game. Hyper Light Drifter, I remember this game.
Rather than language, with a story to be slowly puzzled out over time and significant effort.
So this is the sequel.
Is a total gameplay departure from Drifter.
Say less.
So experiencing it through cryptic hints from Preston about what's going on as he pummels his way through piles of enemies.
This looks fire. I like it.
Gives it even more of an aura of mystery.
Wow.
As with Drifter, Hyper Light Breaker's world is awash in brilliant colors, littered with strange runes and ruins, and is completely devoid of actual language explaining what's going on in it, with characters using pictograms to express their thoughts instead. Everything I see is vaguely futuristic, but also ruinous and somewhat overgrown, with characters and enemies alike fused.
It has a futuristic vibe, but it's like a futuristic dystopia, like a dystopian future kind of vibe. Cause you see like there's some broken down buildings, some, you know, dilapidated environments and things of that nature, and it still looks dope though. I like this art style. It's at the same time it's very colorful and futuristic looking.
Using technology with vaguely shade-like presences and monstrous forms. Lacking explicit storytelling context and full of colorful mystery, it's easy to recognize Breaker as a Hyperlight game on sheer force of aesthetic alone. But aesthetic is where most of the at-a-glance similarities end. Where Hyper Light Drifter was a single-player at launch, top-down, action-adventure game, Hyper Light Breaker is a different genre almost entirely. It's a multiplayer 3D roguelike action game centered around players heading out from a hub into a procedurally generated world, defeating bosses, and returning to do it all again. Preston is playing roguelike too, but he tells me Hyper Light Breaker will include online cooperative multiplayer that's flexible to wherever different players might be in the game's story. There will be different character classes, he says, with different abilities, as well as some degree of customizability.
That's cool.
As a Breaker, players are sent out into the Overgrowth to take down minions of the Abyss King, the mysterious big bad at the heart of Hyper Light Breaker. But it doesn't seem easy to get to said Abyss King. To do so, players have to take down multiple bosses across different procedurally generated biomes, each of which is gated behind multiple beacons that must be activated for each boss to appear. Preston starts out in a lovingly pink biome, deeply reminiscent of the first area of Drifter, and begins zipping around in search of beacons as a number of small enemies pop up to waylay him.
That's an old school, very old school design where you like the objective. Obviously, the objective for most games is like to get to the boss, but like to unlock something so that you can get to the boss, not just get to an area or be progressing through the game. You get stopped by a boss. Your goal is to unlock something to get to the boss. It's a very like old school design. Like kind of reminds me of old school, like games from back in the day, like in the 2000s, like a lot of PS2 action adventure titles.
Fortunately for Drifter fans, combat in Breaker seems familiar. There's a wider array of weapons than before for stringing together combos, with customizable loadouts of melee and ranged weaponry alongside special abilities. But the familiarity comes from a certain pleasant chunkiness that I loved from Hyper Light Drifter, where hits connect hard with satisfying sounds and reactions. While it's hard to say more without actually having hands-on time, I'm optimistic that the transition from top-down to 3D combat won't be too tough to make for those who loved Drifter. That familiarity is also aided by what looks to be some fun movement tech. Breakers can do more than
She
just
got a
dash
hoverboard?
around
Yeah, it's like a hoverboard.
They can climb, leap off cliffs and glide, and, my favorite, scoot around on a hoverboard, shooting off ramps and walls in a system clearly taking cues from Heart Machine's recent Solar Ash. I'm not sure just
That's the
yet
first
if
thing I'm
movement tech
unlocking.
will be quite as robust as Solar Ash, but letting players parkour their way around each biome freely was certainly the right lesson to take.
I feel like every like modern open world 3D action adventure game should have those three elements, like a dash, some sort of glider for when you gliding down, or flight, or actual all out flight, or something you can glide, like move a little bit faster on, like some skates or a skateboard, or like if you look at Devil May Cry, he was able to, if you sprint, after a while sprinting, he can just glide on his familiars, on top of his familiars. That was fire. I think I said V, right? Yeah, I said V in Devil May Cry. Yeah, stuff like that. That's just my opinion.
Preston tracked down a few beacons, each of which is accompanied by its own challenge, most of which are combat-oriented, but not all. It strikes me as a significant diversion from the narrow, room-to-room structure that's become the common parlance of the roguelike genre lately. At any point, Preston can wander off to a different biome and tackle some beacons there, or farm some enemies, or just explore some of the cool, decaying structures if he feels like it. It's all open from the start of each run, though some biomes may be trickier to navigate early in a run than others. Preston notes that there are 5 biomes right now. He's coy as to whether or not there may be more. There's a lot happening on screen at once as Preston explores. He's collecting materials off enemies that he hints will be used for weapon upgrades, noting that you'll keep some currency after each run. Players will always get something out of a run, he says, even if you die in like 10 seconds. There's also a day-night cycle constantly chugging along that coincides with periods of relative safety and danger in the world, as well as indicating that the enemies in the current run are growing more and more challenging as time passes. With all the requisite beacons lit, Preston heads for a boss gate, where the area's boss appears for a confrontation that showcases more of Breaker's combat. It's tough to get a sense of boss combat at this stage. Hyperlight Breaker is still months away from its planned early access launch, so some of the monsters and bosses such as these are still a bit overtuned, and not representative of final combat, he tells me. But I do learn that story progression is tied to these bosses, and every boss kill unveils a little more of the story, the Abyss King, and the mystery of the Never Die curse, which Preston says is at the heart of Hyperlight Breaker.
Oh, so that would explain why you have to, because earlier she mentioned you got to fight the bosses, then you got to fight them again. So I guess that would explain for this story why that's the case. Okay, that's cute.
My takeaway from seeing almost 45 minutes of Hyperlight Breaker played in front of me is that this is functionally a very different game from Hyperlight Drifter, but that the vibes are right. It's a different genre, a different, if linked, story, and with wildly different gameplay loops and combat styles, even if the chunky feel and fundamentals remain at the heart. But the dreamy, futuristic aesthetic and the overall mysterious vibe is thus far spot on, and I'm eager to see how Hyperlight Breaker fits in the larger Hyperlight universe that Heart Machine seems to be building. For more, check out our previews of Endless Dungeon and Bramble the Mountain King, and for everything else, stick with IGN.
Hyperlight Breaker, yeah, Hyperlight Drifter, wow, that's so crazy because I definitely remember this game.
Gameplay departure.
When did that game come out? Let's look real quick. Hyperlight Drifter. Hyperlight. Oh, when did that come out? Looking for it now. 2016. Wow, yeah, I definitely remember this game. Hyperlight Drifter. Then now this is the sequel, Hyperlight Breaker. See, now that's how you do a sequel. Flip the whole genre around, but still stay within the same vibes of the original game. Yo, shout out to this developer, yo, because they really did something with this one. Like, it's looking really good. It looks like they took their time with this one, and they really stuck with what was good about the first game and just capitalized on top of that. That's cool. I like when companies do that, and I like when they take a chance, because you're sitting there, you're scrapping the whole vibe of the first game as far as like how it's played, and you're taking it into a new genre, new camera angle, new development tools, because it's easier to make a top down game featuring, you know, like 64-bit, or I have 128-bit sprites, to something like this, these 3D computer generated stuff like this. So yeah, this is definitely going to be a vibe. Definitely going to check out this game. I'm glad this video popped up in my sub box, because I wanted to know more about this game. I saw it on the ad, and I'm just like, yo, I want to know more about this. So I'm glad that we came across this video. So, but y'all let me know what y'all think in the comments. Does this look fire? Does it look generic? Does it look like it's biting off other games? Y'all let me know. Did you play Hyper Light Drifter? Is it worth going into? Is it worth trying out before you get this? And do you have to play that game to understand this game? Let me know. So you already know the vibes. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. It's your boy JusticeXFalls, and we out.